Welcome to the Natural Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Backus. Today is Monday, March 18th, 2024, and I'm super excited to have what I know is going to be a fascinating, fun, and wide-ranging conversation today with Ally Leadbetter. And Ally, thanks so much for joining me today. I think we're going to have fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for our conversation. We
Yeah, me
never seems to be
too.
a dull moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so just the main sort of the intro, the background I want to give is that we're just about a little bit over 24 hours away from the sun moving into Aries, which means we're here in the northern hemisphere. We're coming into the spring equinox. Equinox meaning equal night, equal day, and we're at that tipping point between light and dark. Wherever you are, we're at the tipping point between light and dark. And here, light is growing, and here in Montana, where we both are, we're starting to get spring, and it's very exciting. Although we seem to be in the last few days of the sun in Pisces, and the sun still carrying Neptune's energy. So we were chatting about it earlier. There seems to be a lot of kind of confusion and sleepiness. And if you remember what Pisces energy is, it's that back and forth between the two seasons. So we don't actually move into spring till tomorrow. Some of us can hardly wait. So energy is coming, and then Mercury will go retrograde and everything will change again. But that's where we are. And so today, Allie and I, we have a lot of sort of things on our mind, but I want to just talk a little bit about you and who you are and what you do in your business, Allie. Um, the name of your business, Wild Betty Healing Arts, which I definitely want to kind of dive into a little bit. And I don't want to try to cover everything from my perspective because you do a lot. And I think what I got so excited about with our conversation is we're both very earthy, tuned into the earth kind of people. And very much, I see you very much as bridging the earth world and the spiritual world. You have a lot of intuitive capabilities. Earth medicine is one of the things you mentioned. I know you do tarot because we end up at the same energy fairs and get to sit next to each other. But I wonder if you could do a little bit better job than me in terms of introducing yourself and your business and all, maybe not everything you do, but kind of the heart of it.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks for the introduction. So, Wild Betty was actually kind of born out of a botanical medicine business. When I first started kind of looking at, okay, how do I want to serve and show up in the healing arts into my community? I've always been an herbalist. I've always had a lot of connection to the plant world and to the natural world. I grew up here in Montana, out on the land, out on the ranch over in Ennis. And so the wildlands and the plant friends and my animal friends, of course, too, have always been like a huge center point in my life. So it was really funny. I was trying to come up with a name for my business, and my last name, Leadbetter, I had a lot of friends that used to call me Lead Betty, and I was like, oh, Lead Betty Botanicals, but it sounded so like mechanical and not it didn't feel right. And my friend was just like, well, why not Wild Betty, And so it's like, it's kind of taken on this whole identity in and of itself, of like, what is embodying the wild spirit, kind of this back to our truest nature of being connected to the land, like you said, and connected to these more subtle realms, because the wildness is communicates in subtle realms, right? So,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. I was raised in a Christian Science household, so I have always had a lot of attachment and connection to the metaphysical realms. And so understanding how our consciousness influences our reality really was an opening point to me getting into how to understand how to connect to and communicate with these more subtle realms. And so, it's like I have kind of one foot in this earth world realm here, but also this really deep foundation in connecting to spirit as medicine. Um, and as far as what I do, I always like, it's always the biggest and hardest question, because it's like when you do have such a breadth of background, I guess, to try to simplify it, I guess I would really say is, my greatest mission, right, is to help people learn how to see themselves as these interconnected wild beings as well. So really learning how to tune into their intuition, tuning into their truest knowing, gnosis. And I know you and I have a lot of connection around that as well, in that, you know, the greatest teacher that you could have is in here, so it's how do we tune into the heart, how do we tune in to listen, and what is in the way of that. And so like working with plant medicines and working with these other more subtle energies to help us kind of clear the decks and clean the lens enough for us to be able to truly tune into that. And like frequency also is another huge part of that, working with sound healing and frequency healing. Yeah, like we could go in a lot of different directions here, but yeah. So I think, does that cover it?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I think yeah, like you say, so many directions to go, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what you're saying about communicating with the subtle elements and the subtle energies, because just listening to you talk, and of course knowing you a little bit, I think one of the things that really interests me, and that seems appropriate for the podcast too, is how we like have that deeper connection with the natural world by recognizing and communicating with it at that more subtle level. Because I think one of the things you said is that that's one of the ways we communicate with nature is essentially through oh, there's a couple of words and I'm not going to be able to think about them, but through that subtle energy level, right? I mean, trees don't talk to us with voice, physical voice, but they talk to us in other ways, rocks, animals, whatever. And I would love to hear more about that and kind of what your
Yeah.
work is in that area.
Yeah, so it's like, these other sentient beings, right? But like non-verbal beings communicate with us through resonance. And so, on like a biophysical level, our electromagnetic field of the heart is in constant communication with the world around us, right? And so when we are operating from a space of coherence, which is like regulated nervous system, we are dialed in, tapped into like the true self, which is the seat of the heart, right? Like that is the seat of the soul, you know? Um, you're able to, receive and send information in a much more clear way. And it's so funny because I was up there before I got on here because I was like, kind of just wanted to check in, and I was up with my horses and I was like, okay, I'm really feeling like something's off about me, and they're so responsive in showing me the ways that I'm not, and they'll like adjust their body language, they'll adjust, like give these micro cues, and as soon as I'm able to like get into a true coherent state, they respond and they are right here with me, like, okay, let's do this work, and they always do. They show up right when I'm like, okay, dropped in, clear in my body, right? And that too is foundational. So having a nervous system that is regulated, right? That we are able to not be in that hyper aroused state, because when you're in that hyper arousal state, it's the information coming in gets blurry, right? So like part of the biggest work is how do we create, because then you're responding out of fear, right? Like you're constantly on edge. You're like, what am I hearing? I'm afraid of whatever it is out there. I hear something rustling in the bushes. These fear states create more dissonance in our field. So when we're able to kind of come back into a deeper regulated nervous system, it allows the heart to actually come into a more coherent state. And there's so many practices that you can do to help build the resilience in the nervous system and to build greater heart coherence. Heart Math Institute has been doing this work since I think like the 80s, and really showing like scientific empirical data, right? Saying like how our heart coherence is able to influence our environment and vice versa, right? So I think, being in such beautiful wildlands here, we have such an opportunity to learn how to attune to those earth resonance frequencies that are a lot there's not so much interference, I guess, as far as like, these other, you know external or like man-made EMFs, right? When we're able to come, and this is part of this rewilding thing, is like coming back into attunement with what the true earth frequency is, because our hearts are naturally attuned to be in resonance with that. So when we go into these more higher density areas where there's a lot of influence of these external EMFs, it really it creates a buffer almost for us to really be able to tune in to our true voice, you know.
So I love what you just said because for many, many reasons. Let me ask you this. When you were met with the horses today, for instance, what did you do to drop into that coherence? I mean, they were definitely giving you the mirroring back to you what was going on. So what practice did you do at that moment to drop in?
So one of my favorite practices, I mean, and I do a couple different ones, but first thing, I have on my website this heart coherence meditation, which is basically like this is the foundation for every single time I do work with anybody, whether it's myself, with out here, or with other individuals, other people. Um, and basically what it is bringing your conduit of light, your direct connection to source down into your field, making sure you're anchored to the above and rooting in deep below and finding that bridge point in the heart center, right? Like that's the first thing that I do. That's always the basis. And then from there, I'll go into doing like some of the pranayama work, doing breath work practices that help to just kind of get the heart rate variability kind of back into a stabilized point. And like one of my favorite ones is the Nadi Shodhana, which you're doing alternate nostril breathing, because it's such an amazing balancer, because I feel like, and sometimes it can be hard because a lot of, there's all these different practices. Sometimes you need something like the ego eradicator in Kundalini yoga that's like you're blasting out the tube, right? Blasting out the channel when you're just like super condensed and densified, I guess is a kind of a word. But it basically it like blows out the pipes essentially, but like the Nadi Shodhana practice, the alternate nostril breathing is just so gentle, and sometimes the gentler the medicine, the more powerful it can be, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And what I love about what you just, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask that is because there's there's so much out there about the value of earth, of getting into contact with the earth and the wild and everything, but we forget that we have access to it even if we're in a skyscraper in New York, right? And that's
Absolutely.
one of the things I love about those practices that you just mentioned is you can do them anywhere, anytime. And I love that you have it on your website. Is that something that people can just go find on your
Yep.
website?
Yeah, it's one of the freebies. You just go on there and you enter in your email address and it'll just get sent directly to your link.
Great.
Um,
That's great.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
and I think, the other place I really wanted to go with you, and it sort of came up, is this whole, we were kind of joking that neither one of us likes the term rewilding because it's so overused now, but the concept behind it, I mean, I think about a lot of things in context with that. And one of them is that, we're afraid of the wilderness. And you and I both live here in this part of Montana where we have access to wilderness. And you and I both like to hike alone in the wilderness, unprotected, completely vulnerable, and completely connected. And so I'm coming down to a couple of questions. One is, and maybe this is a comment as much as a question, that whole thing that you just said about heart coherence and being really like embodied and what I would call being congruent, right? And not in fear mode is
Yep.
one of the ways that I think we have way more, we're able to be part of the wilderness rather than go in as in, I don't belong here and I'm afraid. And so I'd love it if you taught to that. And then also, if this isn't like too long of a setup for a question, also just the whole, what does rewilding mean? I mean, I have my own sense, but I'd love to hear more from you. Because again, we don't have to be in the wilderness to do it, although it certainly helps.
Exactly. So to answer kind of your first question, um, I was like, what was the actual question? Basically, like, how do we engage and find ourselves in that belonging as far as, as we move out into these wild spaces where, we have been really incredibly disconnected from them. We haven't been really taught unless you are in one of those very rare circumstances where your parents, where you were raised in this environment that was like connect, connect, connect.
But
Um,
we're mostly taught to be afraid, right? We're so taught to be afraid of the wilds and the things in the wild and the
and it's so fun. I know, and I think about this a lot. So, because people are like, what are you doing out here all by yourself? I'm like, I'm more afraid of the people out here than I am of what
right.
the animals. Like they know we're cool. But no, so I mean, a practice that I do that I love when I'm out in the woods by myself is sending the energy out to be like, hey, I'm here. I'm not a threat, but I'm also not prey, right? Not a predator, not prey. I'm somewhere in between. Respect, like I'm showing up in love and honor and respect. And I think that that really at the core is kind of what rewilding is all about, is we are showing up in love, honor, and respect to the natural world as much as we are to ourselves. So like part of this practice that I do, it's like I will breathe in the earth energy when I'm inhaling on my walk. It's like I have this thing I call a walking prayer, that it's like every step I take is a walking prayer, where when I'm breathing in the earth energy, the surroundings, the animals that are there. Like I'm breathing in the information that's here, bringing it up through my body, into my heart, into my head, bringing it back down as I exhale and saying, okay, here I am, So it's like, I am here I am. And it's like there's this kind of biofeedback loop then that starts happening, which is really beautiful because you start to sink into, like literally sink into kind of connecting with, I mean, the amount of encounters that I've had with animals, like in this very magical way,
Yeah.
it's like mind blowing at that point when you're like, hey, I'm showing up in love, truly, that I'm showing up as saying like, I love this land as much as I love myself, you know? Then you start to have, that's where the magic comes in, where you're having these interactions with the natural world that are like people think about in fairy tales, but it's like, no, no, this is real. This is real stuff. When you learn how to engage with the natural world in a non-threatening way, because if you're threatened, you're threatening, right?
Right.
Because it's like that's where that incoherence comes in, where you're like, I'm afraid, so I'm putting that fear out there that you should fear me. And it's interesting too, like going back to kind of the horse work too. You see that instantaneously, where people who carry a lot of fear, the horses, you'll see it in their eyes. They're like, what's going on? Why should I be afraid? What are you picking up on that I'm not? You're unsafe, So it's kind of like, again, creating this feedback loop of information. Um, yeah, and so like kind of segueing then into what is rewilding? I mean, rewilding is, I think, really coming into a space of sovereignty with your energy, because I feel like, you know, when you're stepping out of influence, as far as influence being, you know, patterns, programs, beliefs, societal structures, all the things that we tend to get caught up in, all of the stuff that gets stuck into our field and in our conscious awareness. Um, Rewilding is about claiming yourself. Rewilding is about claiming yourself as an integral part in this web of life, and just like you were saying, it's like, I am the earth, I am of the earth, and rewilding is learning how to honor that and recognize that wholly in like the core of your being. And also too, I think it's I this could kind of be really tangential because I'm like, we could go off on a lot of stuff about this, but like there's so much soul loss within humanity in this too, where rewilding is about reclaiming soul,
Yeah.
which is,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, I kind of want to just let that one sit there for a moment because that's really perfect. Rewilding is about reclaiming soul.
yeah.
Yeah, and what struck me in that whole, that whole part of the conversation is it's like whether it's the walking in the woods or, the whole concept of rewilding, it's like this remembering that we belong here.
Mhm.
And I
Literally remembering, like we are
exactly
a member of, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Remember, we're a member of the earth community. And it's funny because I don't talk to people much about this, but when I go out in the woods, that's very much what I do too, is I kind of have this sense of, hey, this is my yard too.
Mm.
I belong here and I'm sharing. And I'll just tell a little story, and I'll bet you have some good ones too, is that a couple of years ago, I had been out for a hike and I came back down the hill to my family cabin and I looked up where I'd just been, which is a kind of an open area on a wooded hillside. And there was a bear grazing in the grass right where I'd walked through. And what I noticed is that the wildlife sort of trade off. One little while there'll be elk there, then there'll be deer, and then there'll be this bear, but they're never there at the same time. It's like they just kind of keep track of each other and take turns. And it made me feel like, oh yeah, this bear was just going, okay, she's out of there, it's my turn. And
Mhm.
we're so taught to be afraid of those things and those creatures. And that I think it does have so much to do with just our sense that, and this is one of the things that I mean, we can see it in the environmental movement, we can see it everywhere, that we think that humans are separate and bad rather than we're part of it, and we just need to remember that and remember how to be part of it. We've forgotten how to be part of it. And maybe
Right. And
part of this rewilding, right?
absolutely. And just to kind of speak on that for a second, I mean, a lot of these, I mean, this is not to discredit what activism is
Right.
in the greater scheme of things, right? Like we need that kind of the wake
Right.
up call, right? Um, but I think it's funny because like it's almost like projecting the idea that humans are the cause of all problems, which to be
Yeah.
fair, like we're a mess, to be fair. But at the same time, like the more that we're projecting that energy out there, it's almost kind of creating that reality and
Yeah.
saying, it's like feeding the like I just keep getting this vision of like the cancer cells, right? So it's like it's
Yeah.
feeding it energy and it's like sweet, grow, 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 take over, and then it's creating all this weird like friction and division in between these different factions of humanity instead of saying, hey, like we can come from a place here to say, look at where we have maybe misstepped. I can really sit and witness that and hold grace for that, but we can also do better, right? New paradigms require us to make new choices. It's like you can't fight fire with fire in this, you know?
Right. Yeah. It's the what isn't it Einstein who's credited with the saying that essentially can't use the same thinking to fix the problems that thinking created. He said
Exactly.
it, but
Yes, exactly. Yeah, you can't fix a problem by the mindset in which it was created. Is that something like
something
that?
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, darkness cannot cast out darkness, only light can do that, right? That's another was that Martin Luther King, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
don't know, but
I'm not,
it's
I'm not great at my quotes, but but the point carries. Yeah.
yeah. So say more about, now I know you have a retreat coming up specifically about rewilding. So maybe this is a good time to chat about that for a minute too. So maybe you could talk about like how, right? What's the how behind that? And yeah, we talked a little bit about the what, but what's more of that?
Yeah, so we are going to be doing my friend Jessie Solon and I are going to be um she's going to come co-facilitate with me. We're going to do a lot of really amazing sound healing work, frequency work, and but I put this retreat together with the intention in mind, and I call it the Reviving Eden retreat because it's like we have to come back to that Edenic state of recognizing our place in creation, recognizing the spirit in all things. That truly is at the base of all of my work, is recognizing that we are spirit incarnate, you know? Um, so kind of the what we're going to be spending 3 days at Boulder Hot Springs here in Montana. Um, where we're going to dive into ancestral work. We're going to do some ancestral healing work, a lot of trance journey work. So that the ancestral healing part is basically, it's going to be, I always, when I go into ancestral healing work, I look at not only the wounds of the past, but also what is the medicine in that too? Like, what are the wounds that we're carrying and what is the medicine in it? So what I really was intending was to look at what are the ways in which we have ruptured our animist roots, that our ancestors have ruptured that animist root, and where have we lived truly in that union. So that's kind of where the ancestral part is. And we start our entire weekend off with that. It is like, we're getting into the nitty gritty of the things that we're carrying in our DNA within our cells. Like, how are we showing up? And what are the things that has led to our incarnation here in our blood and bone memory, right? So that's kind of like setting the foundation, setting us moving forward. What is it that we are carrying within this self to that interferes with that? And then going on from there, we are going to get into making some flower essences, doing a lot of earth attunement work. We are going to be doing let me think, what else are we doing? It's like there's a whole lot of things we're doing. Basically looking at our co-creator templates and seeing like, how are we co-creating this world around us? But really, I think in the biggest core of all of this is going to be just being out on the land, and where we are going to be is a very, very special place. So Boulder Hot Springs is in really close proximity to this place called the Montana Megaliths. And it is, I'm not sure how much detail I want to get into here in this. This may be a whole other conversation. But it is a very sacred site. And there are some stones up there that have very, they're very powerful in helping us to kind of unlock these key codes within us to help us tune into these greater fields. Yeah.
Well, I love, yeah, the whole retreat sounds amazing. I've been to the megaliths once, and I know it's a huge topic, and there's a lot of, and people listening to this, you're probably from all over the world, but there are several very unique spots right here where the stones, they're not as obvious, I don't think, as the stones in Europe, for instance, but once you get there,
You're like, oh yeah, because it's like undeniable. You feel it, and that's where I'm saying, like, oh, and the other big part of this too is like, before we go out and we go out on the land, we are going to be doing heart coherence work. So really learning how to practice these heart coherence practices, so then when we go out onto the land, we're primed and ready to literally come into these frequencies. Because it's really interesting. I haven't been to I have been to Peru, and to some of the sacred sites down there. But these stones specifically, it's so funny how they've taught me a lot about how they kind of work like tuning forks for your field. You go out there and they're like creating this resonant field I can't even begin to describe what happens within the physical body after you go to these places. It's like it is working on all these different subtle layers to really, again, like unlock these parts of yourself that have been kind of turned off.
yeah, that's a great way of
Like,
putting it.
it's like ancient memory gets woken up in there. You sit in these fields and you're like, I mean, all time, space, and dimension kind of melts away, I guess is kind of a way to put it. I've definitely had moments out there where, I'm sitting in some of these dolmens and doing the frequency work and doing the toning. And I'm like, I may or may not dematerialize here and just disappear. It's like we're having one of those like walking through the standing stones kind of moments, because it is that powerful. It's very unique.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
and what this makes me think about, which might feel like a little bit of a tangent, but it's something that you and I have talked about a couple of times now, is that, Well, let me just say that what I think is that there are many ways that people try to force this kind of connection, right? And they try to, there are many ways that people try to force these sorts of experiences through drugs, through, certain kinds of ceremonies, through spiritual practices. And one of the things I kind of wanted to chat about today too is, um, well, basically is our experience, your experience with the hazards of that, right? This trying to, well, let me say a couple more things, and maybe this will be a more clear sort of direction and question. And that is that, I studied yoga for many years and taught yoga for many years. And one of the things that they said in the yoga scriptures and that the good teachers would talk about is that trying to get spiritual powers and yogic powers, there's a lot of powers that yogis gain when they work at it. I don't particularly have them, but there's some pretty wild powers, right? But the problem becomes when you go for the powers rather than letting them develop naturally as part of the practice. And this
Mhm.
whole thing about, what you're talking about can sound really attractive to people, especially in the spiritual path and the spiritual realm. But as you and I have talked about, there are ways that we invite in sort of the wrong energies and that we get kind of vulnerable to the wrong energies. And I'm not saying that would happen necessarily at the megaliths, but there's like a, rather than right or wrong, I think what I'll say is like a more conscious way of doing this and a less conscious way. And I wonder, I just know that you have a lot to say about that and you have a lot of experience with it. So I'd love to hear it. If that
Um,
makes sense. Hopefully
oh
that
yeah,
makes
it
sense.
makes a lot of sense. I was like, we could go on about this one, but I mean, I think what you're just saying is um the need for discernment in these spaces is very, very, very necessary. Especially if you're new on your path, like there can be a lot of illusion in these spaces, right? Like a very pretty mask, and making sure that what your intention is not to feed the ego. It's actually to tear the ego, like to put the ego in its place, right? Like we need the ego to help us learn perspective. Um, but if it is ego driven and you're not showing up in humility and saying, okay, like I am earnestly here on my knees saying, okay, spirit, like show me the way, show me what I need to see. Cause I want to self-actualize. I want to do, and this, is kind of that whole thing about process of spiritual alchemy. It's like I'm working with these as tools to understand myself better so that the universe is then understanding itself better, right? Because all we are is the universe expressing itself. So we are expressions of the universe trying to understand itself better, so it's like when you're coming in with this need for power and control, or if the need is like, how do I make money? Like that's a big one in these new age communities. Is like,
Yep.
how am I bringing in the bucks? It's like that corrupts the medicine, that corrupts the integrity of the container that you're holding. And it is really vitally important for the facilitator to have done their own inner work to be sure that the containers that they are holding are not opening up to some of these other darker energies. And the thing that I've really seen in some of these spaces is manipulation, to where it's like getting people literally hooked in to keep feeding. I've seen some in some cases where there are certain facilitators and practitioners who actually really thrive and feed on people's trauma,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so keeping them stuck in that disempowered state, constantly stuck in that shadow loop, it's like it feeds their own need and whatever it is that's attached to them, right? Because a lot of times it's not and this is the thing, it's like it's not about the individual, it's about the energies running through them. So so it's like have a lot of compassion and empathy, but also don't be a sucker. Again, this is the discernment piece, where it's like, okay, well, what is the pattern here? What is the facilitator actually seeking? And what is their path with their own self-worth been like? And are they practicing what they preach? Are they able to live in integrity with their word? So, it's really interesting to me, and this is not discrediting again, the power of plant medicine work, because there are amazing facilitators and healers who are out here doing this work in integrity, um, for the betterment of humanity, for the evolution of our consciousness. But I will say the amount of, like, I will call it damage control work that I've had to do on individuals coming in to see me after doing some of these plant medicine journeys, where, because you are completely wide open and vulnerable in these spaces. You're not just messing with consciousness. You're not just messing with the mind or the body. You're messing with people's spirits at this point, and that is a great responsibility. So it's like, you make sure that your people have done their work to really hold and carry this medicine. They didn't just do a weekend workshop and say, okay, now I'm a mushroom shaman, or whatever the fuck you want to call themselves, like, it's bad out there. It is, you gotta, like, really kind of suss through who are the facilitators in this. Um, and every soul has its journey, right? So this is not to judge, right? There's a huge difference between judgment and discernment. Um, but the amount of damage that can be done to spirits when they are in this wide open and vulnerable space can take a lot to come back from. you know um Seen some really not so awesome things kind of hook in and plug into people, and track them after that you know it's it's um it's messy. It gets really messy, you know but again, it can be a tool if used in the right way, with the right container, with the right facilitator, to help you really see yourself on a deeper level, and also to clear out all the cellular baggage that we've been carrying around forever. So again, it's this difference between, like, what is my am I showing up in humility, or am I showing up in ego?
Yeah, and I think, you're talking, I think, both from the practitioner point of view, but also from the point of view of who, going to a practitioner. And I think,
Yeah.
one of my spiels that you've heard a little bit and other people have heard a little bit is the difference between control and power.
Hmm.
And really, you alluded to it earlier. It's about coming from fear or coming from authentic love, like that, what's true for you. And that's, when you're talking about practitioners who get caught in the wanting to make money off of it, there's nothing wrong with making money. We all need to. And there's a way to do it that's fear-based, right? I don't have enough, and so I need to find ways to get more people to come, and it can become manipulative, versus this is
Right.
truly mine to do, and I'm going to charge for it because that's the exchange, right?
We're
Yeah.
in that economy, right? Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's like, what is the motivation? What is the drive behind wanting to hold this medicine? Because again, it carries a great responsibility to be a medicine keeper for your community, right? Like, this is not something that's just given out willy-nilly. Like, medicine carriers do years, decades of work with these medicines to make sure that they know them in and out, and that they are in right relationship with the spirits of the medicine, right? Like, it's not just, like, oh, I feel like doing this. And it's not like I'm doing this to make money. I'm doing this because I have a deep devotion to my service to show up as a healer in community, you know? And again, like, the backlash that can come sometimes from people who don't necessarily want to show up in that integrity, it can be really eroding to I mean, whatever we send out there always comes back to us, right? So it's like, what is the motivation? What is the intention you're putting out there? Because it's going to come back to you, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, and it's interesting because as an astrologer, I see this with astrology as well, and you may have had that experience too. I mean, the kinds of stories that people come to me with, about what other astrologers have told them or a family member, it's actually pretty hair curling, I mean, it's like shocking what some people will say. And it right, and I think it's not always with bad intent, right? In fact, may never be with bad intent, but it's this it's a low barrier of entry, and the kinds of healing work that you do and that I do, and that it's not like you can put yourself out there. It doesn't matter how much training you've had. You can have certifications like a mile long, but it's not the same. What's
It's like
that?
it doesn't mean that doesn't mean much.
Right,
Like
exactly.
certifications are great and everything, but it's like cool, like you got your piece of paper, but how are you? Like what is your medicine?
Yeah,
You
and
know?
it's not any different in the conventional medicine world, right? I mean, people can go to medical school and have all and be board licensed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and still get caught in those same ego traps and money traps and, get them in and out the door kind of traps. And I guess where am I going with this? I guess where I'm going with this is that we both, both as practitioners and as people going to seek practitioners, one of my again, my things these days is not giving our power away to the healers, and the healers and astrologers being very, very aware of when people are seeing you as having more power than them and wanting to hand over, decisions for their lives. And I'm betting that you have that experience in your work as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit it right on the head there that it's like there is no hierarchy here, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
yes, this may have been an area of study of decades of my life, but you're the expert on you,
Yeah.
like you are, you know, um, I wanted to talk about giving our power away so much earlier. Um, in giving our power away to a medicine, to a teacher, to some sort of modality, right? Like instead of saying, my power resides within me, my power to heal, my power to create, my power to know, again, going back to the gnosis piece, like my power to know is always only sourced here, truly,
Yeah.
and I love working with the body as the barometer for knowing what is yes and what is no, what is real and what is true, because it can be so easily manipulated through somebody else's lens, you know. It can be distorted because I mean, again, it's like, yes, my job as a facilitator, as a container holder is to hold up a mirror for you. And then how we kind of reflect on, no pun intended, what's going on in the mirror, I can give some insights and some of what's coming through in my mind, but ultimately truth, truth. You know your truth, you know? And so like, my job as a practitioner is to always lead you back to you, to your knowing.
Yeah, and I love the way you say that because it's not the healer healing you, right? It's just like it's not the earth healing you. It's you're already there, you're already whole, but it's showing you what you are, who you are, and you're showing somebody what they are, who they are, but I am already me. It's just that sometimes I forget.
Right, exactly. And I think that's what I love about working with earth medicines is that it's like, it's reminding you of your truest nature,
Yeah.
you know? And it's like, yeah, the body might need some cues to remember, and a healer or a plant medicine can act as a catalyst to help you remember these things. But again, just like you said, it's helping you remember the things that you already know to be true about yourself.
Yeah, and one of the things I don't think we've talked about it yet on the show, but we've talked about it outside is kind of this idea of really being tapped into your own frequency.
Mhm.
We've talked about it in like five different ways, but this being yourself and knowing yourself and being in your wholeness, but it's like knowing your own frequency. And I'd love for you to
Know
talk
your
about that.
know your station.
Know your station. I just absolutely love that.
Yeah. No, I mean, like the whole concept behind that, know your station. It's like, what are you tuned into? You
Yeah.
know, what you are an antenna. And we could go all the way down the wormhole with talking about, or the rabbit hole, not the wormhole. We can go in a wormhole too, but but like the rabbit hole of talking about DNA and how the DNA is specifically tuned to be antenna, and then you being kind of like this all encompassing like super DNA. It's like you are an antenna. And I mean, again, like if you could put an area of focus on two things in your life for understanding how the universe works, and you understand how the heart's electromagnetic frequencies work and the DNA electromagnetic frequencies and how they interact together, like whole worlds open up to you, and how you can create your reality, right? And how you co-create with the world around you. But so it's like, yeah, when we are knowing our station, it means that I am rooted to my truest sense of self. I am connected to my divine source of being, which is the unity of all, right? Like there's a lot of different names for that: unity consciousness, Christ consciousness, God source, whatever you want to call it. It is the all one, right? Um, so when we are tuning into that, and what is my unique expression of that? What is my unique voice in that? And how I anchor that into the earth. And it goes back to kind of what I was talking about, the heart coherence meditation, and how I always start every single session out is the same thing. It's like tune in, anchor into your truest sense of self. That is like the know your station. It is I know my heart inside and out. I know what my soul's frequency sounds like, and I know what my true voice sounds like. And it's not my ego true voice. It is like you could even say, I mean, I have hesitation in even like bringing forward the highest or higher self, because it's like then there's a lot of room for interpretation in that. But it's like knowing what the how source, creator, God, whatever you want to call it, how it speaks through you, that is the know your station. That's
Yeah.
no, it's gnosis. It is the knowing.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, that's why I think that's, like I said, I think that's the title of this whole thing, is the know your station, because that's the place to be, yeah, that keeps you safe and protected, and you, right? Being
Yeah.
you.
Well, and it puts you back in that sovereign space where you have agency then in
Yeah.
how you choose to engage with the world around you, right? Because we can work from all of our pains and patterns and all these like subconscious ways of living, or we can say, wait a minute, like if I could respond in the way that I am choosing to, right? Like it's taking you out of that unconscious reactivity into conscious choice response, you know?
Right, which is where we all really want to be, right?
Yeah.
It's where we
I
really,
because I guarantee you we'd be showing up with a lot more love to one another and a lot more compassion, right?
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Wow. There's still a lot of things on my mind, but I'm kind of mindful of time. So I want to see, what is there anything else that you want to cover? And then I really want to ask you about your chrysalis program too, because that sounded fascinating.
Well, I think that's actually a perfect kind of segue into that, because it's like knowing your station is really clearing the lens. It is getting into what are these subconscious and unconscious ways that I'm interacting and engaging with the world
Yeah.
that has been brought into my being through, childhood wounding, through ancestral pain, through past life pain, like we carry so much forward into these incarnations, Um, so chrysalis, I designed a well, it's a shadow work container, but really what it is, it's a spiritual alchemy container where we are taking all these base materials of our most basic primal human expression, right? And kind of breaking it down and laying all the pieces out in front of us, and really learning how to track how these unconscious and subconscious behaviors work through us. Because a lot of times, if we can really sit down and name and recognize these archetypal patterns that show up through us in a multidimensional layer. So when we're doing the shadow work, we are looking through the whole grid of self. We are looking at mind, body, soul, and spirit. We are looking at every single aspect of self, and in the shadow aspects of those aspects of our whole being, and how they're interfering with our ways to show up kind of as a clear vessel, to be more conscious, to be more present, to be, again, moving into the space of sovereignty where we do have more agency and conscious awareness of how we want to engage with the world around us. Because when we're not even aware that it's happening,
Mhm.
then that's where we're giving our power away to these other things, these other energies that
Yeah.
are kind of driving the ship of our life. So it's like us kind of taking the reins back and saying, oh, okay, when I'm centered here and I can track the way that these things are working through me, I can really say, okay, I see this happening right now. Now, do I want to choose to continue to behave this way, or do I want to choose to do something different? Right. So we're basically repatterning and reprogramming our entire field. We are reprogramming our consciousness.
Can
So chrysalis is like taking what is in hidden and obscured in the dark, and refining ourselves back into our truest nature, into our truest state.
Can you give sort of a specific example of either how you've done that in your own self or seen it done with a client that is like something that most of us could relate to?
Oh yes, and I will talk about this as far as our whole eclipse season jumping in real hot for me in my north and south nodes here coming into Aries and Libra. My Aries north node is saying, okay, time to cut the codependency, right?
Mm.
Like it's time for you to stand in your independence, right? So, I mean, historically, um I found a lot of comfort in codependency, and in saying like my whole identity is wrapped up in how I can serve and take care of and heal and put the other first, right?
Yep.
Others needs, others wants. I'm a big people pleaser. Like I want to make everybody happy. I have to make sure that I'm not speaking too loudly or taking up too much space or doing all these things, right? Like I'm working on that one hard, right? Oh, that's the other thing. Shadow work never ends. Like this whole process is a lifelong process,
Right.
so it's good to be, equipped with the tools to help you actually navigate, because this is probably something I'm always going to be working through, is like checking myself and being like, where am I giving away my power to taking care of somebody else's needs first? Yes, having that awareness of like not being the narcissist, right, is kind of the other side of that, where you're like, it's like that narcissist empath axis. Where's the middle ground in that? Where am I saying like, I'm not going to be putting everybody else ahead of me. And I'm also not going to make it all about me, which is kind of that Aries energy. So it's like, how can I kind of stand in the balance of that and say, okay, there is a happy medium here. There is a way for me to speak clearly, have my boundaries, be able to like to advocate for myself and use my voice when it's appropriate and necessary, and to have some power behind my voice, because that's been something that I've struggled with for a long time. And so I caught myself doing this today in where I had to be in the same room as my ex-husband. And I instantly went into this old pattern of shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. Like it literally feels like I'm kind of imploding on myself and being like, oh, your energy overtakes me. Right. And I walked out of that room and I was like, what like, what was that? Did you see that? Yeah, I saw it. No, we're not doing that again. Hey, take note, putting that in the data bank. Got that? Okay. I noticed even when I'm in his energy, this is something that I do. Okay. So next time going into that, I'm going to prepare myself a little bit better, and I'm going to make a different choice. I'm going to say, I need to do this, this, and this to help me stand in my power when in that space with this other individual, you know? So that's just one example. But yeah, the whole eclipse season is it's gonna be a big one for me, I think.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, and it is, as you point out, it's perfect for this eclipse season with the Aries Libra energy, and that, yeah, and that polarity between independent, strong pioneer me, I am, and the peacemaker, want to get along, but also the one who knows how to cooperate, right? And the energy that unites them is this energy of being myself in relationship, and that's the only way we have a good, healthy relationship, is if we're both coming from our true sovereignty, as you've said several times. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah,
Well,
the
and I love too, just like tying that into this rewilding work too. It's like that is a perfect opportunity for you to practice that,
yeah,
to be like, I
yeah,
am my unique expression in this greater weaving of the world around us, right?
yeah, with love, honor, and respect for all the other beings that I'm in contact with, whether I know it or not.
Yep.
Whether there's a bear over there that I don't see, or this tree in front of me that I do see, that's like the love, honor, respect of all of them. And yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. Is there any of the last things that are coming up for you that you want to make sure to share at this point? Because I don't want to cut us off.
Oh no, I feel like we covered so much ground, but it's all so like it all connects. Yeah. So I think I would love to just kind of throw out there that the Reviving Eden retreat is in June 6th, or sorry, 7th through the 9th.
Okay.
And then we start the Chrysalis cohort. Um I was gonna start it April 1st, but I'm feeling like we really need to wait until after the eclipse. So we will probably be waiting until probably like April 15th to start that. So
And just to make sure, the Reviving Eden retreat, you said June 7th through 9th, and that's here in Montana and
yep,
Boulder
yep.
Hot Springs. And then the Chrysalis program, can you say a little bit more about just the logistical details, how long it's online, I think, et cetera?
Yeah, so it's an 8-week program. So we meet for the first 3 meetings in as a group class, and I'm keeping it really, really small. Um, just to kind of create intimacy, in the space because it's deep, it is deep, deep work. And I feel like the more closeness that we can have kind of in this container, the more we're gonna get out of it, right?
Yeah.
So we start that April 15th and it's gonna be via Zoom. And then we'll do so first 3 are gonna be group teaching classes. And then where we're going to do trance journey work, we're going to do, meeting the shadows, looking at the shadow and the true self archetypes, teaching on spiritual alchemy. And then we're going to do, there's going to be 4 weeks of one-on-one work where we're actually tracking through the shadow grid and doing just kind of refining the process a little bit more and helping get a little bit more individualized work with me to help kind of refine like naming and tracking these shadows and looking through our triggers and helping people kind of through the process because again it's not exactly the most comfortable but it is so rewarding once you learn how to do it and you're like okay now I do this I catch myself on the fly now where it's happening like kind of as as things come up I don't have to sit there and log out these pages and pages of writing now it's like okay you go through these processes a lot quicker and you kind of course correct a lot faster. And then, at the end of all of that, we do a shadow alchemy ceremony, which is essentially like a cord cutting ceremony to these shadow archetypes and reclaiming our true self and integrating in the true self. So it's cutting the cords of disempowerment. So it's not, okay. And I want to be really clear about this. Cutting cords isn't like, okay, cut goodbye, right? Like, because we don't lose our shadows. You can't lose the shadow, right? But it's integrating them. It's cutting the cords of disempowerment so that you're no longer being controlled by them, right? This is that reclaiming that sovereignty piece where you're saying, okay, I'm no longer just siphoning energy off to this thing or this archetype, this energy unconsciously. Now I'm integrating it back into my whole self so that I can truly sit in the driver's seat of my life. And again, this is a practice. This is a lifelong practice but it's like the more that we do it the better we get at it, right? And the more different choices we can make.
Yeah, right, exactly, which is what we all want, right? Is to be able to make our own choices. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's
Uh,
really, yeah, this has been so much fun. This has been a great conversation.
I know I love talking with you. It's always
Vice versa.
yeah, I'm like there's always a lot of the similar train of thoughts I feel like on this. So
Yeah, and it's cool. I mean, I appreciate that we're in the same geographic region and getting to work together a little bit more on all this as well. So thanks so much
definitely.
for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I look forward to more conversations and getting out there with you this spring.
Yeah,
Uh,
me too.
well, maybe we can go for a walk, not by ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah, and to all of you listening, thank you so much. There are all the ways to get a hold of Ally and find out more of her about her programs are going to be in the show notes, and that and I'm grateful you're here, and thanks so much for listening to us, and see you next time. And with that, I can figure it. There it is. Got to find the right button now with Zoom.